My father once told me that time was the Carter family's most valuable asset. More precious than our stocks, our real estate, our sprawling international company. Time, he said, was the one thing we could command, bend, and sell. It's a lesson he drilled into my siblings from birth. A mantra whispered in the cradle and reinforced in the boardroom. It's probably why he never had any to spare for a daughter who wasn't willing to sell her own life for the good of his business. A daughter who saw time not as a commodity, but as the very fabric of a life to be lived, not leveraged. And now he's here, in my office, on my time, begging me to give him more of mine. He stands in front of my desk, a ghost haunting the monument I built to my own survival. I barely recognize him. The bespoke suit that once screamed power, that was tailored to make him seem like a giant among men, now just hangs off his frame, a hollow shell. The shoulders that seem to hold up the world are slumped in defeat. His hair, once a proud silver mane, is thin and lifeless. He sees Emily Carter, the celebrated founder of Phoenix Innovations, the tech empire that's eclipsed his own dying star. He sees the woman on the cover of Forbes, the disruptor of the year, the name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in every boardroom he can no longer enter. He sees the power, the success, the fortress of glass and steel I've built around myself. He sees the woman who commands the very asset he prized most, time. My time. He doesn't see the girl he left for dead 5 years ago. He doesn't remember her face, slick with rain and tears, as his security guard shoved her out of the gates of her own home. He's forgotten the sound of her pleas, the desperation in her eyes. He's forgotten what it looks like to have nothing, because having nothing was a concept so alien to him it might as well have been a fairy tale. I haven't. I remember the texture of the asphalt under my bare feet. I remember the scent of rain on hot pavement, the taste of hunger, the chilling sound of a dead phone line. He sees the fortress. He has no idea it was built brick by brick with the memory of that night. Let's rewind. The Carter family mansion wasn't a home. It was a museum. A cold, marble gallery dedicated to the worship of wealth and legacy. Every polished surface, every silk curtain, every ancestral portrait on the wall, was a testament to our public image. The perfect, powerful, untouchable Carters. But inside those gilded walls, the air was thin and frigid, recycled and sterile. It was a house built on transactions, not affection. A place where love was a liability on a balance sheet, and loyalty was just a currency you spent to get what you wanted. My father, Richard Carter, was the museum's formidable curator. His world was a ledger of profits and losses, and his family members were just assets to be managed, their value assessed with cold, quarterly precision. My older brother, William, was the heir apparent, a perfect, polished mirror of our father's ruthless ambition. I remember watching him fire a senior executive, a man who had served our family for 30 years, with a placid smile because his division's growth had slowed by a single percentage point. He called it trimming the fat. My father called it a proud Tuesday. My sister, Charlotte, was the socialite. Her marriage to some vapid European duke a carefully negotiated merger designed to open up new markets. I remember her sitting with our mother and a team of lawyers, not discussing love or a future, but debating the contractual obligations of producing an heir, and the penalties for social misconduct. She was a product being beautifully packaged for delivery. And I was the disappointment. The rounding, I was a flawed asset, depreciating with every book I read that wasn't on his approved list, with every question I asked that challenged the status quo. I was too inquisitive, too independent. While Charlotte practiced her curtsy for visiting dignitaries, I spent my time in the library, devouring books on macroeconomics and disruptive technologies. While William practiced the cold, corporate smile he'd used to close his first hostile takeover, I was drafting unsolicited proposals for streamlining our supply chain, which my father dismissed as childish fantasies during a family dinner, to William's smug amusement. I was, in my father's words, a difficult asset, one that refused to perform to specification. The night it all came crashing down was the night of the annual Carter Foundation Gala, the social event of the season. A grand, televised performance of our family's power and supposed benevolence. The ballroom glittered, a suffocating sea of diamonds, champagne, and forced smiles. I remember the weight of the emeralds around my neck, borrowed from the family vault, feeling less like jewelry and more like a beautiful, diamond-studded cage. My father took the stage, his voice booming with a practiced warmth that never reached his eyes. He spoke of legacy, of dynasty, of the bold future of Carter Global. And then, his gaze found me in the crowd, and he gave me a triumphant, possessive glint in his eye that made my blood run cold. He announced a strategic merger with the behemoth Whitmore Industries, a deal that would secure the Carter empire for another generation. A merger, he declared, to be cemented by the engagement of his youngest daughter, Emily Carter, to Daniel Whitmore. The room exploded in applause. Daniel Whitmore, a man twice my age with a shark's smile and a reputation for being as cruel in private as he was in business, gave me a predator's look from across the room, raising his glass. I couldn't breathe. My chest seized. This wasn't an engagement. It was a sale. I was the lamb being led to slaughter to the sound of thunderous applause. I was the price of keeping Carter Global on top. So I stood up. The clatter of a fork dropping somewhere nearby was the only sound. The silence that followed was more deafening than the applause had ever been. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. But most of all, I felt my father's. His face, just moments ago beaming with pride, was now a thundercloud of pure fury. No, I said. My voice was shaking, but in the crushing silence, it was as clear as a bell. I will not. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. But in the world of Richard Carter, a world built on absolute, unquestioning compliance, it was an act of war. The gala, let's say, ended abruptly. The ride home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. The air in the limousine was so thick with unspoken rage, I could barely draw a breath. As soon as we arrived, I was summoned to my father's study, the family's execution chamber. William stood by the fireplace, smirking, swirling a brandy. Charlotte was examining her manicure on the chaise lounge, looking bored. My mother, a silent, elegant statue, stood by the window, her face a mask of practiced indifference, her back to the room. Her back to me. My father paced in front of me like a caged tiger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You humiliated me. You humiliated this family. You jeopardized a deal worth billions, a deal that was to be my masterpiece. You were selling me," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I was securing our future," he roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany desk. "A future you have always taken for granted. Every meal you've eaten, every dress you've worn, every breath you take in this house is paid for by the very deals you always were a spoiled, sentimental brat, Emily. You never understood the real world. You read your books and thought you were better than us." "The world isn't a fantasy, little sister," Charlotte added, not even looking up from her perfectly polished nails. "It's a marketplace. You either buy, or you get sold. I did my duty. It's not so bad. You get used to it." I looked from face to face, desperately searching for a flicker of empathy, of family, of love. I found nothing. Just 3 cold, hard reflections of my father's ambition. I turned to the figure at the window. "Mother," I pleaded. "Please." She didn't move. She just stared out the window into the dark garden, refusing to meet my eyes. Her silence was the deepest cut of all, a betrayal so profound it hollowed me out. "You have a choice," my father said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, calm level. "You will call Daniel Whitmore in the morning. You will apologize profusely. You will beg for his forgiveness and accept his proposal. Or you will walk out of this house with nothing but the clothes on your back and the shame you've brought upon us." He expected me to break. He expected tears. He'd controlled my entire life by threatening to withhold his approval, his affection. But in that moment, seeing the utter, chilling emptiness in their eyes, I realized his approval wasn't worth anything. It was counterfeit currency in a bankrupt bank. I lifted my chin. "I'll take the clothes on my back." The look on his face wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated shock. He couldn't comprehend it. In his world, no one chose nothing over the Carter name. The shock quickly hardened back into white-hot rage. He pointed a trembling finger toward the door. "Then you are no longer a Carter," he said, his voice shaking with fury. You are nothing to me. Get out. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. Within minutes, 2 of his personal security guards, men who'd known me since I was a child, men I'd built forts with in the garden, were standing in the doorway. They wouldn't look at me. Escort her off the property, my father commanded, his voice like ice. She is not to take anything. Her phone, her credit cards, her access, terminate it all. As of this moment, Emily Carter does not exist. They led me through the marble halls of the museum I once called home. A sudden downpour had started, the rain lashing against the windows, coming down in cold, hard sheets as if the sky itself was weeping for me. One of the guards, a man named George who used to sneak me cookies from the kitchen when I was a sad little girl, hesitated at the grand front door. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of pity in his eyes. "Sir," he started to say, his voice thick with unease. Now, my father's voice boomed from the study down the hall. George's face hardened, his professional mask slamming back into place. He opened the door, and with a gentle but firm pressure on my back, pushed me out into the storm. The heavy, ornate door clicked shut behind me. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the sound of my life being severed. I stood there, drenched in the cold rain, staring at the enormous golden gates that were now locked to me. I was wearing a priceless couture gown and $1 million worth of borrowed emeralds, and I had never been more broke, more utterly destitute in my life. They hadn't just disowned me. They had erased me. They had left me for dead. The first 24 hours were a blur of shock and a cold, creeping fear that was more chilling than the rain. The fine, rain-soaked silk of my gala dress clung to me like a second skin, a cruel, mocking reminder of the life that was now gone forever. I just walked for hours, until the sun began to rise. I kicked off the ridiculous, jewel-encrusted heels that had cost more than a car and left them in a gutter, walking barefoot on the gritty, unforgiving pavement of a city I had only ever seen through the tinted windows of a chauffeured car. I found a grimy, 24-hour diner, and huddled in a corner booth, shivering, drawing stares. When I tried to pay for a simple cup of coffee, the card declined message flashed in mocking red letters. I tried again. Declined. Panic began to set in. I pulled out my phone to call the one university friend I thought might help, a girl I hadn't spoken to in months. No signal. I quickly realized the line was dead. They had been ruthlessly, terrifyingly efficient. Shame, hot and sharp, washed over me. The other patrons were staring, whispering. The waitress looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. I had to get out of there. I fled, the untouched coffee still on the table. The only thing of value I had left was a simple gold locket my grandmother had given me. The only person in my family who'd ever shown me unconditional love. The only thing I owned that felt tied to a person, not a transaction. I sold it in a dingy, dimly lit pawn shop for $200. The man behind the counter barely looked at me, his eyes flicking over my ruined dress and bare feet. He probably thought I was a high-end escort who'd had a bad night. Maybe he was right. I had been for sale, after all. I just refused to be bought. Holding those crumpled bills in my hand, the absence of the locket on my neck felt like a physical wound. That $200 got me a week in a motel that smelled of stale smoke, bleach, and despair. The first night, I lay on the lumpy mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling, the sounds of the city a terrifying cacophony. For the first time in my life, there was only silence from my family. No calls, no texts, no emails. I had never felt so utterly, devastatingly alone. The days bled into one another in a monotonous cycle of survival. I bought cheap, ill-fitting clothes from a thrift store and started the humiliating search for work. What was on my resume? An art history degree and a list of charity committees I'd been forced to sit on. I had no real skills. No references. A few potential employers recognized the name Carter and looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and morbid curiosity. Most just saw a girl with soft hands who'd clearly never worked a day in her life. They weren't wrong. My first job was washing dishes in a greasy kitchen. My hands, once soft and manicured, became raw, chapped, and burned. I cleaned hotel rooms, scrubbing toilets for people who had no idea an heiress was cleaning up their mess. I worked double shifts, fell into my lumpy motel bed exhausted, and got up to do it all again, fueled by nothing but spite and a primal will to survive. There were moments I almost broke. One night, huddled in my cold room, eating cold soup from a can because the motel's microwave was broken, I saw my family on the news. They were at another charity event, smiling for the cameras. My father, my mother on his arm looking radiant, William, Charlotte and her Duke. A reporter asked my father about the collapsed Whitmore deal. He smiled genially and said, "We decided to pursue other avenues. Family is everything, and we must always protect our own." It was as if I'd never existed. A ghost photoshopped out of the family portrait. I crumpled to the floor and sobbed. A raw, animal grief mixed with a rage that felt bottomless. They weren't just erasing me. They were thriving on my absence, using my sacrifice as a platform for their own false virtue. But I didn't crawl back. I couldn't. The image of my mother's silent complicity and my father's cold dismissal burned in my mind. It was a fire that kept the despair at bay. Their cruelty became my fuel. The spark happened on a Tuesday. I was waitressing at a different diner, and the place was pure chaos. The lunch rush was a nightmare. Orders were being lost, customers were getting angry, cooks were shouting. Their system was a mess of handwritten tickets jammed onto a rotating spindle. And as I watched it all unfold, dodging angry customers and frantic busboys, a part of my brain that had been dormant for months suddenly clicked on. The part that used to read logistics textbooks for fun. The part my father had called a childish fantasy. I didn't see chaos. I saw a system failure. I saw inefficiencies. I saw a problem that could be solved. On my 10-minute break, I grabbed a stack of napkins and, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline of the lunch rush, I redesigned the entire workflow. A simple color-coded system for the tickets, a revised floor plan for server sections to minimize movement. It wasn't genius, but it was practical. Terrified, my heart pounding, I approached the diner's gruff owner, Sal. I showed him my napkin scribbles. He looked at them, then at me, grunted and said, "Fine. You're in charge of it tomorrow. If it's a disaster, you're fired." The next day we did it. And it worked. The shouting decreased. The orders went out faster. The customers seemed happier. The tips went up. At the end of a long, grueling, but successful shift, Sal pulled me aside and pressed a crisp $50 bill into my hand. "Good work, kid," he said, a reluctant smile on his face. "You've got a good brain on your shoulders." It was more than the money. It was the first time in my life someone had looked at my mind, at one of my ideas, and said good work. Not because of my name or my connections, but because of my brain. That $50 bill felt more real, more valuable, than the millions I had once taken for granted. It was mine. I had earned it with my intellect. In that greasy spoon diner, smelling of burnt coffee and old frying oil, I wasn't the disowned Carter daughter anymore. I was a problem solver. And I realized, with a shocking, electrifying clarity, that I could solve my way out of this hell. It was just a seed, a tiny, fragile seed planted in scorched earth. But I was going to make it grow. That seed of confidence was all I needed. The public library became my new home, my sanctuary, my university. I used their free computers to take online courses in coding, finance, and business management. I devoured every article, every case study, every textbook I could find. While my old family was attending galas, I was learning Python. While they were vacationing in St. Bart's, I was mastering advanced supply chain logistics. I was fueled by lukewarm library coffee, stale vending machine snacks, and a relentless, obsessive desire to rebuild myself into someone my family would no longer recognize, someone they would one day be forced to reckon with. After a year of working 3 jobs and studying nonstop, I had saved enough to quit the diners and the hotels. I created a fake resume, scrubbing the name Carter from my history as completely as they had. I became Emily Peters, a hardworking, fictional graduate from a state university, with a bit of fictional administrative experience. It was a terrifying gamble. Armed with my new identity, I landed a low-level, unpaid internship at a small, scrappy tech startup. It was fast, chaotic, and brutally meritocratic. Seniority didn't matter, only ideas. It was perfect. My boss was the founder, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman named Sophia Bennett. Sophia wore jeans and hoodies to the office and didn't care about pedigree. She cared about results. In my first week, she threw an impossible logistics problem at our team. A shipping bottleneck that was costing the company thousands every day. My colleagues, all with impressive degrees from Stanford and MIT, were stumped. They saw a roadblock. I saw the diner all over again, a system failure waiting for a new system. I stayed up all night, fueled by the memory of Sal's $50 bill. I ran the numbers, built a model, and quietly placed a single sheet of paper on Sophia's desk the next morning. It was a one-page proposal for a radical new routing algorithm that would not only solve the bottleneck, but cut our overall shipping costs by 30%. She called me into her office an hour later, holding the paper. "This is either the most brilliant or the most idiotic thing I've ever seen," she said, her expression unreadable. "Walk me through it." For the next hour I did. I defended every assumption, explained every calculation, parried every one of her pointed questions. When I finished, heart pounding, she leaned back in her chair and just looked at me for a long, silent moment. "You're no intern Emily Peters," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Who the hell are you?" So I told her. Everything. The gala, the disownment, the pawn shop, the diner, the library, the fake resume. I expected her to fire me on the spot. Instead, she laughed. A deep, genuine, booming laugh. "I knew I liked you," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "The old boys club chewed you up and spat you out. So what are you going to do? Let them win." Sophia became my mentor, my champion. She saw the raw ambition my father had tried to crush and decided to sharpen it into a weapon. She promoted me from intern to a paid position. Then she promoted me again and again. I led the team that created the company's flagship logistics software, the very software based on my napkin and napkin plan. It made the company millions. It made me indispensable. I went to Sophia and told her I was leaving to start my own company. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she wrote me a personal check on the spot. She was my first investor. "Don't just build a company, Emily," she told me, her eyes fierce. "Build an empire. And make it so big and so loud they can't possibly ignore you." So I founded Phoenix Innovations. The name was a promise to myself. From the ashes. The growth was meteoric, fueled by my obsessive work ethic and an uncanny ability to see inefficiencies where others saw standard practice. We were featured in tech journals, then business magazines. The Phoenix phenomenon, one headline called it. We acquired a struggling competitor, then another. Soon, I was working from a corner office in a towering glass skyscraper, the very building I now own. The one that looks down on the distant, smaller building bearing the Carter Global name. I never looked back. But I watched them. Through quarterly reports and market analyses, I tracked the slow, painful decline of Carter Global. Turns out, my father made the deal with Whitmore anyway, using my younger cousin as the new bargaining chip. But it was a bad deal from the start, driven by ego, not sense. Whitmore's company was a house of cards, built on debt and deceit, and the merger poisoned Carter Global from the inside. They were dinosaurs, refusing to adapt, and the meteor was coming. And I, the girl they had cast out into the rain with nothing, had built the new world from their ashes. And so here we are, back in my boardroom, on my terms. The air is still, the silence punctuated only by the hum of the city far below. My father finally finishes his rambling, desperate plea. He talks about legacy, family, the good of the company, the same tired, hollow words he used 5 years ago. He is asking for a bailout. A massive injection of capital to save Carter Global from bankruptcy. He's asking me, the daughter he erased, to save him. I let the silence hang in the air, thick and heavy. I watch him squirm in the chair that costs more than the motel room I once lived in for a month. He's trying to find an angle, a foothold, trying to reassert the parental control he's long since lost. But his math doesn't work here. This is my ledger. "You speak of family," I say, my voice calm, level, and as cold as the marble in his mansion. "Tell me, father. Was I family the night you threw me out in the rain? Was I family when you cut off my phone, my bank accounts, my entire existence? Was I family when I was scrubbing strangers' toilets to survive?" He flinches as if struck. "Emily, it was a difficult time. I made a mistake. I was angry. I never thought you'd actually. A mistake. I lean forward, my hands flat on the desk. A mistake is spilling coffee on your suit. A mistake is a typo in a report. Erasing your own daughter is a choice. A deliberate, calculated, and from your perspective at the time, a financially sound decision. You deemed me a bad investment. You cut your losses. You wrote me off. I stand and walk to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city that is now mine. My city. I've followed Carter Global's decline with great interest. I continue my back to him. The Whitmore deal was poison, a classic case of ego-driven expansion. Your refusal to innovate, your insistence on promoting William, who has the business acumen of a garden gnome, over more qualified people. You did this to yourself. Mistake by mistake. I turn back to face him, a predator who has cornered her prey. Want to know what I did after you threw me out? I washed dishes. I scrubbed floors. I slept in a room where the door barely locked. I ate cold food from a can and read library books about arrogant, powerful men like you. And I learned from their mistakes. Most of all, I learned from your mistakes. I walk back to my desk and slide a single, elegantly bound document across the polished mahogany surface. It lands in front of him with a soft, final thud. You came here for a rescue, I say. I'm not in the business of rescues. I'm in the business of acquisitions. He stares at the document as if it's a snake, his face pale. What is this? My offer, I state. Phoenix Innovations will acquire the outstanding debt of Carter Global. We will assume all assets and liabilities. The company itself, the name, will be saved. The thousands of employees whose livelihoods you've gambled away will keep their jobs. He opens it, his hands trembling so badly he can barely turn the first page. He reads the number, the total acquisition price, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of hope appears in his eyes. Then he keeps reading the terms, the conditions, the fine print. And the hope dies, replaced by a dawning, abject horror. This is nothing, he chokes out, looking up at me, his face ashen. This number, it covers the debts, but it leaves the family with nothing. Precisely. I say, my voice devoid of all emotion. Nothing. The exact amount you left me with. You'll have a roof over your head and a modest stipend to live on. But the jets, the mansions, the galas, the name on the buildings, all of it will be gone. You will no longer be a Carter in the way the world understands it. You will be just a man. He looks up at me, his eyes wide with a terror I've never seen before. It's the look of a king who has just realized he's a pauper. A god who has discovered he is mortal. He is finally, truly begging, not with words but with his eyes, pleading for the mercy he never once showed me. I give him none. That's the deal. I say, my voice as final as a gavel strike. Take it or leave it. But if you walk out that door, I will let Carter Global collapse, and I will buy its remaining assets in the bankruptcy auction for pennies on the dollar. The choice for once is yours. He slumps in the chair, a broken man in a hollow suit. The pen sits next to the document. He has no choice. He will sign. He will save his company by destroying the one thing he ever truly valued. His family's pride, his legacy. I watch him, not with triumph, not with the sweet taste of revenge I imagined all those lonely nights, but with a strange, hollow emptiness. It's just the closing of a ledger. A final accounting. A debt has been paid in full. I am Emily Carter. My family left me for dead. But I didn't die. I was reborn in the fire of their rejection. And I rose from the ashes, not to get revenge, but to get even. And now, as I stand here watching him pick up the pen, I realize my story isn't about what they did to me. It's about what I did without them. My name is Emily Carter, and I am the founder of my own life. The past is a closed book. The future is a blank page. And for the first time, it is entirely and unequivocally mine.